January 24th. We're introducing ourselves to Vermont Action Network, the Public Policy Director at CCTV Center for Media and Democracy, a familiar face to the committee. And we'll just do a quick hi, how you doing with introduction here. So, Representative Matt Byron, Chair of the committee. I represent Northwest Addison County. And
Representative Lisa Hango, Vice Chair of the committee, and I represent Franklin 5.
Representative Sandy Pincinel from Dorset, and I represent Bennington, Rutland 1.
Michael Morgan, Grand Isle, Chittenden, as you know, Albert, Islemont, North Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero, and West Milton.
Bob Hooper, the neighborhood.
B.L. Coffin, Weathersfield, Baltimore, Cavendish.
Mary Catherine Stone, our neighborhood, Burlington.
Jay Hooper, Brookfield, Braintree, Randolph, Granville, and Roxbury.
Kate Nugent, Curtis, South Burlington.
Hello, I'm Shay Water-Evans from Charlotte and Heinsberg.
I'm Lauren Glenn. I am the Public Policy Director at CCTV Center for Media and Democracy. I very much appreciate being here today with you. I'm representing Vermont Access Network, which is a network of 24 community media centers across the state. I think many of you are involved or familiar with those centers. I've been working in this field since 1984 and started the first community media center in the Burlington area and then helped to build up the VAN network since then. So now I'm no longer executive director, but I get to do the fun stuff, which is public policy. It's always been, I think, the most interesting work, because unless we are able to create an open space for community-based media, no one else is going to do it for us. So here we are. So thank you for the opportunity, Chairman. And we are here for FY26 budget request. And does that work? Okay.
There you go.
And we're seeking 1.35 million in funding for this year. We are included as part of the Secretary of State's FY26 budget. I think some of you will remember last year our efforts to identify an ongoing revenue source for community media in light of declining cable revenue. We were not able to secure an ongoing revenue source, but we were included in the base budget as part of the Secretary of State. And for that, we're quite grateful. And as part of that, we were asked to discuss with the Secretary of State future funding trends. And so we came up with a 3-year plan, which is why this year we're here for 1.35 million. As I mentioned, Vermont Access Network is a nonprofit membership organization, and we are 24 community media centers, and we serve not only the cable service territories, but beyond the cable service territories, especially now that we're online, providing service that way, but also our brief, whether it's summer camps for kids or even coverage of public meetings that aren't necessarily in the cable service catchment area. This is what we do. And we promote what is called public educational and government access. The acronym for that is PEG. And we more recently, well, in the last 20 years, redefined it as community media. And we've been operating, as I mentioned, since 1984, thanks to the Vermont Public Service Board, now the Public Utility Commission, which had created, followed up on the 1984 Cable Act, which allows franchising authorities to exact franchise fees from cable companies and set aside channels and funds. And that's really been the foundation of the funding for these centers. So this is a map of the centers and how they're distributed around the state. And again, we do serve beyond these areas, which I think is just an important point to make. And we work in several areas, but let's just say the 3 basic areas is government transparency and access, education and media literacy, and local identity and community connection. For example, at CCTV, we have archives that date back to 1984. We have 45,000 pieces of media that we're in the process of digitizing, and it creates a legacy for the community, and that's true all across the state. We cover public meetings. We have an open forum for anyone that wants to come and use equipment. And as I mentioned, we preserve local history. And during COVID-19, because we were able to keep the wheels of democracy turning during the period when people went from being in the world to in their homes, we were identified as an essential service as we pioneered online interactive meetings. So we also provide a technical knowledge base that's available in all communities and has helped many municipalities to set up their online access. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the gist of. There we go. We employ 150 people across the state, and we produce about 18,000 hours of content, which makes us the biggest content producer in the state. And that includes not just staff, but just regular people making their own content. We are on 80 local cable channels and dozens of internet channels. And in the process of doing this, I put out a call to say, well, how much online content are we producing? And it looks like last year we had 1.3 million YouTube views and 283 website visits. So that's pretty impressive. And I think you'll find, and I think you know this, that there may be some select board meetings or city council meetings where, you know, maybe 20 or 30 people will watch or even attend. But if it's a subject that's very close to someone's heart, for example, a gun control issue, you'll have 1,000, 2,000 people online watching. And of course, you'll have a full house in the building. So the fact that we're there all the time, so when these issues come up, people can participate as they wish and what they feel is important. That's one of the values of what we provide. Here's a snapshot of Rutland PEG TV, which is actually the biggest catchment area in the state. They have the biggest base of subscribers and geographic area. So just in the month of January, they had almost 17,000 views in the last 28 days. And they have about 2,400 people that subscribe to their YouTube. So I'm stressing this just so you realize that this is not just confined to cable, and we have had to innovate to go beyond the cable world. That said, cable revenue is about 75% of the funding for us now, and it's declining across the United States. This is a US map graph, and in Vermont. In some of the more rural areas, it's not declining as quickly because of the broadband rollout, but the way that cable companies are now packaging their television services, they're basically encouraging people to cut the cable cord in lieu of the internet cord. So cords are not being cut, they're just being replaced. So that means that revenue for these community media centers is declining. I think that's a case we've made pretty clearly. And since the COVID epidemic, we have been included in the state budget in the form of one-time funding, as well as some of the COVID relief dollars. And so we are, as I mentioned, $1 million in FY25 included in the budget. And we've worked with the Secretary of State to identify a 3-year funding cycle, which brings us in at 1.35 million for this year, 1.8 for next, and 2 million for FY28. So less we think that we will rely on the state for the whole funding gap. We will not. I will explain that in a moment, but I just want you to know that these numbers are derived from our analysis of revenue trends in the cable world, where it's been going, where we think it will go, and we estimate a 7 to 10% decrease in cable revenue and a 7 to 10% increase in expenses. And as you've heard, I think from countless people who testified before you and in the legislature, that is largely due to the increased cost of labor and healthcare. That's where our costs are going up. Of course, equipment is more expensive, but just in terms of a percentage of our budget's about 85% is labor and healthcare costs. All right, I'm sorry. One, go down. So, we generate about 7.8 million from cable revenue this year. And we also generate an additional up to 10 million, 2+ million, so that we generate about 10 million. And these are the sources of income. I hope you can see that, but you see the legislative grant is a significant piece of our fund, again, which we are most grateful, but also combined philanthropy, interest income, fees for service, and the municipal revenue, I think, is quite interesting because we're paid by municipalities in some cases, not all cases, but in the case of Burlington and South Burlington, in our case, and the surrounding communities, they pitch in a certain percentage towards what we provide for coverage, but also they purchase additional coverage. In other communities, there are allocations made at town meetings that are set aside for access operations. So there is quite a significant municipal contribution. That would be a property tax contribution. Also, there are grants and other income and cable revenue. So we have a mix, and that mix is changing over time. Cable revenue accounts for roughly 74% right now this year. And then this picture is meant to show if we increase the revenue that we're getting in other sources by about 10%, you'll see that we'll have less of a dependence on cable revenue as we will need to, and more of a diverse funding base. Thank you for your consideration. Our objective here is to encourage you to include us in your memo to the Appropriations Committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Representative Hooper.
I think this is an important thing for our consideration. In Burlington, it's ubiquitous, sort of. You can see anything you want to see, you can put anything up. I ran a program for 10 years, I bet, and brought state level, the treasurer, all kinds of people in, and it was, fairly heavily viewed. But I think the most important point is one that Lauren made, in that cable wire income is going down, but it's an income that is because we're behind the ball on it to some degree. It has transferred over. I bought a Samsung large screen similar to that one, and lo and behold, Samsung has a internet supplied cable network built into the television. So it's like they have become Comcast or whatever, and it's free. Normally, we would be getting a slice of that income for our public access. They found a way around it, so we need to catch up, I think, technology wise also. But this is something like community radio, where in an emergency and something like that, it becomes very important. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's a vital resource. We have to help it evolve with how media is being consumed and distributed. And if helping out with some funding is part of that process to leave this resource for the community, that digital resource to get content, messages, things of that nature out there. I mean, we're having a lot of those conversations right now, but especially in and around technology. There's some radio and broadcasters and whatnot around sort of like terrestrial radio and how that integrates with digital, and back and forth is a very similar conversation to that, right? As we get closer to the budget memo for the big bill, I definitely want to keep this one of the conversations we have. I have a lot of respect for the work that's been done there for decades and the resource that it is. I don't want to repeat myself, but it's a very valuable tool for the public, and we got to make sure it's functioning, viable, and the staff has, comfort that their financial supports are where they need to be to let them do their job the way they need to do it. So that's my thoughts on it. Anyone else have a question?
moment.
I just thought perhaps I would add, for those of you who might be new to the conversation, the federal government has restrictions on the kinds of regulations that can be attached to the internet. There's a thing called legislation called the Internet Tax Freedom Act. And so as a consequence, while there is a public benefit requirement of cable operators, because by virtue of the fact that they string their cables in the public rights of way, there isn't a concurrent or a corollary on the internet providers. These are often now the same cable in the same rights of way, but there's no public benefit requirement. So there is no way to say, well, let's generate some revenue for community-based media from internet providers. Last year, we had worked on some possible revenue alternatives. There was not an appetite to do it, understandably. I think over the long term, there is going to need to be a modernization of the telecommunications tax structure. And it is going to happen in different ways. In our view, to level the playing field between all the providers, there would be public benefits accrued from all providers. In the eyes of the industry, the level playing field would be, there'd be no public benefits for anyone. And in fact, there's a piece of legislation in Congress right now that attempts to rewrite the 34 Communications Act and to basically eliminate cable franchising altogether. So there are threats in all places, and your support here, standing tall, is vitally important.
Representative Hooper.
So who pays for the infrastructure of internet now on a pole by pole basis? Burlington Telecom runs on the same pole. You're 100% right, where there would have been, I suppose, some kind of a use fee for the utility that had owned the pole.
Well,
How do they?
every utility that attaches to a utility pole, I'm calling cable and internet a utility in this case, pays a fee to the pole owners.
Mhm.
So, for example, Green Mountain Power owns most of the poles in the state. And there's a fee, maybe it's $10. I don't know what the fee is. There's a pole attachment fee. And that's just for the maintenance of the pole. That's a rental fee.
Who taxes that attachment fee?
It's not a tax.
How do we?
We don't tax it. That was actually our proposal last year, to have a pole attachment fee as a revenue source. So that was one of the ideas. A streaming tax was another idea. But right now, just it's a rental fee on the poles. So anyone that attaches pays it to the pole owners, which is mostly Green Mountain Power.
Yeah, poll taxes.
Well, yeah, I know we weren't actually allowed to say that.
BOLE pole.
We had to call it the PAT or the pole attachment fee.
I just remember a lot of that banter on the floor on a particular day last year. It's a long conversation about it. Any other questions? So, I mean, this may be the first formal request we've received as a committee for the big bill. So we'll definitely put this on the list of the considerations once we start building that later in the session. But thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for your all the work we do. I appreciate it.
So it seems we do have, the folks are coming in. We're filling this gap that popped up with the Morristown Charter for a quick walkthrough, and then I have a meeting at 11 with the Lieutenant Governor. So shortly before 11, I'm going to hand off to Representative Hango to drive the table into lunch. We have the Vermont React partnership talking to us about some of their priorities and introducing themselves to us. But for the next couple of minutes until the sponsors of the charter come in, we're gonna go offline and